Question 1. Consider a scenario where, while conducting a lawful traffic stop on a public street in Chicago, Illinois, a civilian begins recording the interaction from the sidewalk approximately 20 feet away. The civilian is not being loud, aggressive, or physically interfering with the officer's duties. The officer feels uncomfortable with being recorded. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Chicago Police Department officer? Option A. Politely inform the civilian that they are free to record from their current position, but must not interfere with the investigation or approach closer while continuing with the lawful traffic stop. Option B. Ignore the civilian and continue the traffic stop without acknowledging their presence or their recording. Option C. Demand that the civilian immediately stop recording, citing the officer's discomfort. Option D. Immediately attempt to detain the civilian for obstruction of justice due to their recording. Correct answer is A. Politely inform the civilian that they are free to record from their current position, but must not interfere with the investigation or approach closer, while continuing with the lawful traffic stop. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict between a citizen's right to record and a police officer's duty to maintain order and safety. The officer must balance the need to conduct a lawful investigation with the public's right to observe and document police activity, all while ensuring the safety of themselves, the subject, and the public. Misjudging the situation could lead to accusations of misconduct, obstruction of justice, or unnecessary escalation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to acknowledge the citizen's right to record, while clearly and calmly explaining the officer's need to conduct their investigation without undue interference. This approach involves informing the individual that they are free to record from a safe distance, but must not impede the investigation or approach too closely. This aligns with established legal principles regarding the right to record police activity in public spaces, provided it does not interfere with lawful duties. It respects civil liberties while maintaining operational control. Incorrect approaches analysis. Interfering with the recording by demanding the citizen stop, or by physically blocking their view without a clear and present danger to the investigation or public safety, is a violation of the citizen's right to record and could lead to legal repercussions and disciplinary action. This approach demonstrates a lack of understanding of constitutional protections. Ignoring the citizen and continuing the interaction as if they are not present, without any attempt to communicate or establish boundaries, could be perceived as unprofessional and may allow the situation to escalate if the citizen feels unheard or disrespected. While not directly violating a right, it misses an opportunity for de-escalation and professional engagement. Immediately assuming the citizen is obstructing justice and attempting to detain them without sufficient probable cause that their recording activity is actively hindering the investigation or posing a threat is an overreach of authority. This approach risks false arrest and civil rights violations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a de-escalation and communication-first strategy. When faced with a citizen recording, the officer should assess the situation for any immediate safety risk or interference. If none are apparent, they should calmly inform the citizen of their rights and responsibilities, setting clear boundaries for their recording activity to ensure it does not impede the investigation. This balanced approach respects civil liberties while upholding the officer's duty. Question 2. Upon reviewing a traffic stop in Chicago, Illinois, an officer observes an individual exhibiting signs of extreme nervousness and avoiding eye contact. The officer has no other information suggesting criminal activity or the presence of contraband. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take regarding a potential search of the individual's vehicle? Option A. Conduct a pat-down of the individual and their vehicle based on their perceived nervousness. Option B. Detain the individual and conduct a comprehensive search of the vehicle without consent or further justification. Option C. Immediately demand to search the vehicle due to the individual's nervous behavior. Option D. Identify themselves as a police officer, state the reason for the stop, and request consent to search the vehicle. Correct answer is D. Identify themselves as a police officer, state the reason for the stop, and request consent to search the vehicle. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the legal rights of an individual and the integrity of a potential investigation. Misjudging the situation could lead to the suppression of crucial evidence, a violation of civil liberties. or an unjustified escalation of force. The officer must make a rapid assessment based on limited information, adhering strictly to the established legal framework governing interactions with the public in Illinois. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves clearly identifying oneself as a police officer, stating the reason for the stop, and then requesting consent to search. This aligns with the Fourth Amendment principles of the United States Constitution, as interpreted by Illinois courts, which generally require probable cause or consent for a search. By seeking consent, the officer respects the individual's right to privacy and avoids a potentially unlawful search. This method preserves the integrity of any evidence obtained and upholds the officer's duty to act within legal boundaries. Incorrect approaches analysis. Approaching the individual and immediately demanding to search their vehicle without stating a reason for the stop or seeking consent is a violation of the individual's Fourth Amendment rights. Such an action presumes probable cause where none may exist and bypasses the requirement for consent or a warrant, potentially rendering any discovered evidence inadmissible in court. Initiating a pat-down of the individual and their vehicle based solely on a hunch or the individual's nervous demeanor, without any articulable suspicion of criminal activity or a weapon, constitutes an unlawful search and seizure under Illinois law and the U.S. Constitution. Nervousness alone is not sufficient grounds for a search. Detaining the individual for an extended period and conducting a thorough search of their vehicle without any reasonable suspicion or probable cause, and without obtaining consent, is an unlawful detention and search. This infringes upon the individual's liberty and privacy rights and would likely lead to the suppression of any evidence found. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and respect for individual rights. This involves 1. Articulating a lawful basis for any interaction, e.g., reasonable suspicion for a stop. 2. Clearly identifying oneself and the purpose of the interaction. 3. Seeking voluntary consent for searches when probable cause is absent. 4. Documenting all actions and justifications thoroughly. In situations involving potential criminal activity, officers must always operate within the established legal parameters to ensure the admissibility of evidence and maintain public trust. Question 3. When evaluating a traffic stop in Chicago, Illinois, an officer observes a noticeable bulge under a suspect's jacket that could reasonably be interpreted as a concealed weapon. The suspect is compliant but appears nervous. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take to ensure safety while respecting the suspect's rights? Option A. Immediately order the suspect to the ground and conduct a full search of their person and vehicle without further investigation. Option B. Draw their firearm and point it at the suspect while demanding they exit the vehicle. Option C. Ignore the bulge and proceed with issuing a citation without addressing the potential threat. Option D. Clearly state the reason for the stop, observe the suspect's behavior, and if reasonable suspicion exists that the person is armed and dangerous, conduct a limited pat-down for weapons. The correct answer is D. Clearly state the reason for the stop, observe the suspect's behavior, and if reasonable suspicion exists that the person is armed and dangerous, conduct a limited pat-down for weapons. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential violation of an individual's rights during a lawful stop, requiring officers to balance their duty to investigate with the constitutional protections afforded to citizens. The officer must make a rapid judgment call based on limited information, where a mistake could lead to a lawsuit against the department or a compromise of public safety. The presence of a bulge under the jacket, while suspicious, is not definitive proof of a weapon and requires careful consideration of the totality of circumstances. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a measured and de-escalatory approach that prioritizes officer safety while respecting the individual's rights. This means clearly communicating the reason for the stop, observing the suspect's behavior, and making a determination about the need for a pat-down based on reasonable suspicion that the person is armed and dangerous. If reasonable suspicion exists, a limited pat-down for weapons is permissible under Illinois law, specifically the principles established by the U.S. Supreme Court's Terry v. Ohio decision, which is incorporated into Illinois jurisprudence. This approach balances the need for investigation with constitutional protections against unreasonable searches. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately ordering the individual to the ground and conducting a full search without further articulable suspicion beyond the initial stop. This is a violation of the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as it constitutes an unreasonable search and seizure. Illinois law, like federal law, requires reasonable suspicion that the person is armed and dangerous to justify a pat-down, and a full search is only permissible if probable cause develops. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the suspicious bulge and proceed with the stop without any further investigation into the potential threat. Respecting rights is paramount. Officers have a duty to ensure their own safety and the safety of the public. Failing to investigate a credible, albeit not definitive, indicator of a potential weapon could lead to a dangerous situation. This approach neglects the officer's responsibility to assess and mitigate immediate threats. A third incorrect approach is to immediately draw a weapon and point it at the individual based solely on the observation of a bulge. While officers must be prepared for dangerous situations, the use of force, including the brandishing of a firearm, must be proportional to the perceived threat. Without more information or aggressive behavior from the individual, this action could escalate the situation unnecessarily and be considered an excessive use of force, potentially violating constitutional rights and departmental policy. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly articulating the lawful basis for the stop. They should then observe the subject's demeanor and actions, considering all available information. If reasonable suspicion of being armed and dangerous arises, a limited pat-down for weapons may be justified. Throughout the encounter, de-escalation techniques should be prioritized, and any actions taken must be objectively reasonable in light of the circumstances. Documentation of the encounter and the officer's rationale for their actions is crucial. Question 4. The analysis reveals that while on patrol in a Chicago neighborhood known for recent gang-related activity, Officer Miller observes an individual standing near a dimly lit alleyway. The individual is wearing dark clothing and appears to be looking around nervously. As Officer Miller's patrol car approaches, the individual quickly turns and walks away, glancing back at the vehicle. Officer Miller has no information that this specific individual has committed any crime or is in possession of a weapon. Based on these observations, what is the most appropriate course of action for Officer Miller to take? Option A. Initiate a high-risk traffic stop of the individual, ordering them to the ground and conducting a full search, given the potential for criminal activity. Option B. Ignore the individual and continue the patrol, as there are no specific indicators of criminal activity or immediate danger. Option C. Continue observing the individual from a distance, and if the individual's behavior continues to be suspicious and articulable, consider initiating a brief investigatory stop to inquire about their presence and observe for any visible signs of a weapon. Option D. Immediately exit the patrol car, approach the individual, and conduct a pat-down search for weapons based on their presence in a high-crime area and nervous demeanor. The correct answer is C. Continue observing the individual from a distance, and if the individual's behavior continues to be suspicious and articulable, consider initiating a brief investigatory stop to inquire about their presence and observe for any visible signs of a weapon. Explanation. The analysis reveals that this scenario presents a common challenge for Chicago Police Department, CPD, officers, balancing the need for immediate public safety with the constitutional rights of individuals. The officer must make a rapid assessment of a volatile situation, considering potential threats while adhering to established legal and departmental protocols. The core of the challenge lies in discerning when an individual's behavior escalates from mere suspicion to a level that justifies a more intrusive police action, such as a stop and frisk, without infringing upon Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. The correct approach involves a measured and legally sound response that prioritizes de-escalation and evidence gathering within constitutional boundaries. This approach requires the officer to articulate specific, observable facts that create a reasonable suspicion that the individual is involved in criminal activity and is presently armed and dangerous. This aligns with the principles established in Terry v. Ohio, which permits a brief investigatory stop and a limited pat-down for weapons if an officer has a reasonable, articulable suspicion of criminal activity and that the person is armed. The officer's actions must be based on objective facts, not hunches or generalized fear. This ensures that police power is exercised judiciously and respects individual liberties. An incorrect approach would be to initiate a stop and frisk based solely on the individual's presence in a high-crime area or their nervous demeanor. This lacks the specific, articulable facts necessary to establish reasonable suspicion and would violate Fourth Amendment protections. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately detain and search the individual without any prior observation of suspicious behavior or a direct threat, as this constitutes an unlawful seizure and search. Finally, an approach that involves aggressive questioning and intimidation without a legal basis for the stop would also be professionally unacceptable, as it erodes public trust and can lead to the suppression of any evidence obtained. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with observing and documenting specific behaviors. This is followed by an assessment of whether these behaviors meet the legal standard for reasonable suspicion. If reasonable suspicion exists, the officer must then assess if there is reasonable suspicion that the individual is armed and dangerous to justify a pat-down. Throughout the encounter, officers must maintain professionalism, use de-escalation techniques where appropriate, and be prepared to articulate the legal justification for every action taken. Question 5. Operational review demonstrates that Chicago Police Department, CPD, officer, responding to a reported burglary in progress, observes an individual loitering near the alleyway adjacent to the burgled premises. This individual is known to be an associate of a recently apprehended suspect involved in a string of similar burglaries in the area. The individual appears nervous and is glancing frequently towards the alley. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the officer? Option A. Continue with the primary burglary investigation, disregarding the individual as irrelevant to the immediate scene. Option B. Detain the individual by placing them in handcuffs and conducting a full search of their person and any belongings they are carrying. Option C. Immediately approach the individual, identify themselves as CPD, and demand to search their person for stolen property due to their known association with a recent suspect. Option D. Maintain a safe distance. Observe the individual's behavior for any overt criminal activity, and request backup and supervisory assistance to assess the situation further. The correct answer is D. Maintain a safe distance, observe the individual's behavior for any overt criminal activity, and request backup and supervisory assistance to assess the situation further. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for Chicago Police Department (CPD) officers, balancing the need for swift action in a potential crime scene with the imperative to preserve evidence and uphold constitutional rights. The officer must make a rapid judgment call under pressure, considering the immediate safety of the public and themselves, while also recognizing the potential for a violation of search and seizure laws if not handled correctly. The presence of a known associate of a recently apprehended suspect adds a layer of complexity, raising the possibility of further evidence or accomplices. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the immediate area and observing the individual from a safe distance without direct confrontation or intrusive search, while simultaneously requesting backup and supervisors. This approach prioritizes officer safety and public welfare by preventing immediate escalation or potential flight of a suspect. Crucially, it allows for the proper procedural steps to be initiated, such as obtaining a warrant or developing probable cause through further observation and intelligence, thereby respecting the Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures as interpreted by Illinois law and federal constitutional standards applicable in Chicago. This methodical approach ensures that any subsequent actions are legally sound and procedurally correct, minimizing the risk of evidence suppression or civil liability. Incorrect approaches analysis. Approaching the individual directly and demanding to search their person based solely on their association with a recently apprehended suspect is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action constitutes an unreasonable search and seizure under the Fourth Amendment, as mere association does not establish probable cause or reasonable suspicion for a stop and frisk. It bypasses the necessary legal thresholds for infringing upon an individual's liberty and privacy. Ignoring the individual and continuing the initial investigation without any observation or reporting is also professionally unacceptable. While avoiding an unlawful search is important, failing to acknowledge and assess a potentially relevant individual at a crime scene or in its immediate aftermath can be seen as dereliction of duty. It misses an opportunity to gather crucial information that could aid in the ongoing investigation or prevent further criminal activity. Immediately detaining the individual and placing them in handcuffs without any overt criminal activity observed or a warrant is another serious violation. This constitutes an unlawful arrest and detention, again infringing upon the individual's constitutional rights. The CPD's use of force policies and legal standards require a higher threshold of probable cause for arrest than mere association with a suspect. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement must employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights, departmental policy, and officer safety. This involves a continuous assessment of the situation, gathering information, and acting within legal parameters. When faced with uncertainty, the default should be to de-escalate, observe, and seek supervisory guidance or legal counsel before taking actions that could infringe upon individual liberties. The principle of totality of the circumstances must guide all decisions, ensuring that any intrusive action is supported by specific, articulable facts and probable cause or reasonable suspicion, as defined by Illinois law and constitutional precedent. Question 6. Implementation of proactive policing in Chicago. An officer observes a vehicle parked in a restricted area with its engine running. The officer approaches the vehicle and notices a strong odor of what appears to be cannabis emanating from inside, and sees a small, clear plastic baggie containing a green leafy substance on the passenger seat. The individual in the driver's seat appears nervous. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the officer? Option A. Advise the driver that they are being detained for further questioning and allow them to leave after a brief conversation. Option B. Secure the scene, ensure the safety of all individuals involved, and immediately contact a supervisor and the appropriate investigative unit to report the findings and request guidance. Option C. Conduct a full search of the vehicle and its occupants based on the observed contraband and the smell of cannabis. Option D. Ignore the smell and the visible substance, as it is a minor infraction, and continue with routine patrol. The correct answer is B. Secure the scene, ensure the safety of all individuals involved, and immediately contact a supervisor and the appropriate investigative unit to report the findings and request guidance. Explanation. Implementation of effective community policing strategies in Chicago requires officers to navigate complex situations involving public trust and departmental policy. This scenario is professionally challenging because it tests an officer's ability to balance immediate public safety concerns with the procedural integrity of an investigation, all while maintaining positive community relations. The officer must make a swift decision that respects individual rights and departmental guidelines, even under pressure. The best approach involves securing the scene and immediately contacting a supervisor and the appropriate investigative unit. This is correct because it adheres to the Chicago Police Department's established protocol for handling potential evidence in serious incidents. By involving supervisors and specialized units, the department ensures that the investigation is conducted by trained personnel, evidence is collected and preserved according to legal standards, and the integrity of the case is maintained. This also demonstrates transparency and accountability, reinforcing public trust by showing that the CPD follows proper procedures. An incorrect approach involves the officer attempting to conduct a full search of the vehicle without proper authorization or probable cause beyond the initial observation. This is professionally unacceptable because it risks violating the individual's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures, potentially leading to the suppression of any evidence found. It also bypasses departmental procedures for evidence handling and investigative protocols, undermining the chain of custody and the overall validity of the investigation. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the suspicious circumstances and allow the individual to leave without further investigation. This is professionally unacceptable, as it represents a failure to uphold the officer's duty to investigate potential criminal activity and ensure public safety. It could also be seen as a dereliction of duty if the observed circumstances later prove to be indicative of a serious crime. A final incorrect approach is to detain the individual for an extended period based solely on the initial suspicion, without developing further probable cause or contacting a supervisor. This is professionally unacceptable, as it can lead to an unlawful detention, infringing on the individual's liberty rights and potentially creating liability for the department. It also demonstrates poor judgment in escalating the situation without proper procedural justification or supervisory guidance. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to departmental policy and legal standards, followed by seeking supervisory guidance when faced with ambiguous or serious situations. This involves assessing the immediate threat, identifying relevant policies, and understanding the legal parameters of their actions before proceeding. Question 7. To address the challenge of maintaining evidence integrity during a lawful search in Chicago, Illinois, what is the most appropriate immediate action for a Chicago Police Department officer who discovers a handgun under a couch cushion? Option A. Secure the handgun, photograph its exact location and condition, and then meticulously package and label it according to CPD policy before transporting it. Option B. Leave the handgun at the scene, clearly marking its location, and continue searching for other contraband. Option C. Hand the handgun to a civilian witness present at the scene for safekeeping until the investigation is complete. Option D. Immediately place the handgun in the patrol car's trunk to secure it while continuing the search. Correct answer is A. Secure the handgun, photograph its exact location and condition, and then meticulously package and label it according to CPD policy before transporting it. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Chicago Police Department (CPD) officer regarding the proper handling of evidence discovered during a lawful search. The officer must balance the immediate need to secure potential evidence with the strict procedural requirements mandated by Illinois law and CPD policy to maintain the integrity of the evidence and ensure its admissibility in court. Failure to adhere to these protocols can lead to the suppression of crucial evidence, jeopardizing the prosecution and undermining public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the discovered firearm and documenting its location and condition precisely as found. This approach aligns with the Illinois Code of Criminal Procedure and CPD general orders concerning evidence handling. Specifically, the officer must ensure the chain of custody is unbroken from the moment of discovery. This includes photographing the item in situ, noting its exact position, and then carefully collecting and packaging it according to departmental procedures, ensuring it is properly labeled with the date, time, case number, and the officer's name. This meticulous documentation and secure handling are paramount to preserving the integrity of the evidence and satisfying legal requirements for its admissibility. Incorrect approach is analysis. Seizing the firearm and immediately placing it in the patrol car's trunk without further documentation or proper packaging is procedurally flawed. This bypasses essential steps in evidence preservation and chain of custody, potentially compromising the evidence's integrity and raising questions about its handling. It fails to meet the detailed documentation requirements of Illinois law and CPD policy. Leaving the firearm at the scene unattended while continuing the search for other contraband is a severe breach of protocol. This creates a significant risk of evidence tampering, contamination, or loss, which would render the evidence inadmissible and could lead to disciplinary action. It directly violates the officer's duty to secure and preserve evidence promptly. Collecting the firearm and immediately handing it over to a civilian witness for safekeeping is an unacceptable abdication of responsibility. Law enforcement officers are solely responsible for the secure collection and custody of evidence. Entrusting it to a civilian introduces an uncontrolled element into the chain of custody, making the evidence unreliable and inadmissible. This action demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of evidence, handling protocols, and legal requirements. Professional reasoning. When encountering potential evidence, officers must follow a systematic approach grounded in legal mandates and departmental policy. This involves immediate assessment, securement, meticulous documentation, proper packaging, and strict adherence to chain of custody procedures. The primary objective is to ensure the evidence is preserved in its original state and can be reliably presented in legal proceedings. Officers should always consult their training and departmental guidelines when in doubt about evidence handling procedures. Question 8. Examination of the data shows that during a response to a reported disturbance at a residential address in Chicago, an officer observed several items scattered in the immediate vicinity of the alleged altercation that appear to be related to the incident, but are not immediately identifiable as contraband or weapons. The officer is under pressure to quickly de-escalate the situation and ensure no further harm occurs. Which of the following actions best demonstrates adherence to regulatory compliance and professional conduct in this scenario? Option A. Secure the immediate area, photographically document the scattered items in situ, and then carefully collect and tag them as potential evidence, noting their exact location and condition in the initial report before further processing. Option B. Prioritize immediate interviews with all parties involved, deferring the collection and documentation of any scattered items until after the initial statements are obtained and the scene is deemed safe. Option C. Discard any items that do not appear to be immediately dangerous or illegal, assuming they are irrelevant to the disturbance, to expedite the scene clearance process. Option D. Instruct responding officers to quickly clear the area of all scattered items to prevent any potential tripping hazards or further disturbance, without detailed documentation of each item's original position. Correct answer is A. Secure the immediate area, photographically document the scattered items in situ, and then carefully collect and tag them as potential evidence, noting their exact location and condition in the initial report before further processing. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement officers in Chicago, balancing the need for swift action with the imperative of adhering to departmental regulations and legal statutes. The professional challenge lies in the potential for conflicting priorities, the immediate perceived threat versus the established procedures for evidence handling and reporting. Careful judgment is required to ensure that actions taken do not compromise the integrity of an investigation or violate an individual's rights, even under pressure. The best professional approach involves prioritizing the immediate safety of all individuals involved, securing the scene to prevent further contamination or loss of evidence, and then meticulously documenting all observations and actions in accordance with Chicago Police Department, CPD, general orders, and relevant Illinois state statutes concerning evidence collection and reporting. This approach ensures that the initial response is both effective in mitigating immediate danger and compliant with the legal and procedural framework governing police work. It upholds the principles of due process and maintains the integrity of potential evidence, which is crucial for any subsequent legal proceedings. An incorrect approach would be to immediately discard potentially relevant items without proper documentation or authorization, even if they appear insignificant at the time. This failure to adhere to evidence preservation protocols, as mandated by CPD general orders, risks compromising the investigation and could lead to the exclusion of crucial evidence in court. Another incorrect approach is to delay securing the scene or documenting initial observations due to a perceived lack of immediate threat, as this can lead to the loss or contamination of evidence, violating established procedures for scene management. Finally, failing to consult with a supervisor or follow established reporting procedures for unusual circumstances, even if the situation appears resolved, represents a significant procedural and regulatory failure. Such omissions can lead to accountability issues and undermine the chain of custody for any evidence. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with assessing immediate threats to life and safety. Following that, the focus shifts to scene preservation and meticulous documentation of all observations and actions, referencing relevant CPD general orders and Illinois law. When in doubt, consulting with a supervisor or seeking guidance from departmental legal advisors is paramount. This systematic approach ensures that immediate needs are met while upholding the highest standards of regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. Question 9. Research into the legal and procedural requirements for responding to a potential crime scene at a private residence in Chicago, Illinois. An officer observes signs suggesting a suspect may have just fled into the home. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the officer to take? Option A. Immediately enter the residence without consent or a warrant to apprehend the suspect and search for evidence. Option B. Knock on the door and ask for consent to search the residence for the suspect. Option C. Observe the residence from a distance and wait for additional officers to arrive before taking any action. Option D. Secure the exterior of the residence to preserve the scene and begin the process of obtaining a search warrant based on observed probable cause. The correct answer is D. Secure the exterior of the residence to preserve the scene and begin the process of obtaining a search warrant based on observed probable cause. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for Chicago Police Department, CPD, officers, balancing the need for immediate information gathering with the constitutional rights of individuals. The officer must act swiftly to secure a scene and gather potential evidence, but also must be mindful of the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. The pressure of a potential crime and the desire to apprehend a suspect can lead to hasty actions that could compromise the investigation or lead to legal challenges. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the immediate area to preserve potential evidence and prevent further harm or escape, while simultaneously initiating the process to obtain legal authorization for a more intrusive search if necessary. This approach prioritizes both public safety and constitutional rights. Specifically, the officer should establish a perimeter to prevent contamination of the scene and to ensure no evidence is disturbed or removed. Concurrently, the officer should begin the process of documenting observations and preparing to seek a search warrant from a judge based on probable cause. This aligns with the principles of the Fourth Amendment, which requires warrants for searches of private property unless specific exceptions apply. The CPD's general orders and Illinois state law emphasize the importance of lawful evidence collection and respect for individual liberties. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately entering the residence without consent or a warrant to search for the suspect and any potential evidence. This directly violates the Fourth Amendment's protection against warrantless searches of a person's home, which is considered the most protected space under constitutional law. Such an action would likely lead to the suppression of any evidence found, jeopardizing the prosecution of the suspect and potentially leading to disciplinary action against the officer. Another incorrect approach is to simply observe the residence from the street and wait for backup without taking any steps to secure the scene or initiate the warrant process. While this avoids an illegal search, it risks the destruction of crucial evidence if the suspect is inside and attempting to dispose of it, or allows the suspect to escape. It fails to balance the immediate needs of an investigation with constitutional protections. A third incorrect approach is to attempt to gain consent to search from a person who is not legally authorized to give consent, such as a minor or someone who does not reside in the property. Relying on invalid consent for a search is legally unsound and can lead to the same evidentiary issues as a warrantless search. Professional reasoning. When faced with a situation where a crime may have occurred and a suspect is believed to be present in a private residence, officers must employ a systematic and legally sound approach. This involves 1. Assessing the immediate threat to public safety and taking necessary steps to neutralize it, e.g., securing the perimeter. 2. Documenting all observations meticulously to establish probable cause. 3. Initiating the legal process to obtain a search warrant if probable cause exists and no exigent circumstances justify a warrantless entry. 4. Consulting with supervisors and legal advisors when in doubt. This structured decision-making process ensures that actions are both effective in law enforcement and compliant with constitutional and departmental mandates. Question 10. Which approach would be the most accurate and compliant method for calculating Officer Miller's overtime pay for the recent 2-day period, given that the Chicago Police Department's general orders specify an overtime rate of 1.5 times the regular hourly wage, and Officer Miller's regular hourly wage is $30.00. On the first day, Officer Miller worked 10 hours, and on the second day he worked 12 hours, with both days being approved for overtime. Option A. Calculate the overtime hours for each day separately. Day 1, 10 hours asterisk $45. 00/hour equals $450. 00. Day 2, 12 hours asterisk $45. 00/hour equals $540. 00. And then sum these amounts for a total of $990. 00. Option B. Sum the total hours worked, 10 plus 12 equals 22 hours, and multiply by the overtime rate of $45.00 per hour, resulting in $990.00 without considering any specific overtime thresholds per day. Option C. Calculate the total hours worked, 10 plus 12 equals 22 hours. Subtract a standard 16-hour work period for 2 days, 22/16 equals 6 hours of overtime, and multiply by the regular hourly wage of $30.00, resulting in $180.00. Option D. Calculate the total overtime hours by summing the hours worked beyond an 8-hour shift on each day, 2 hours on day 1 plus 4 hours on day 2 equals 6 total overtime hours. Then multiply this by the overtime rate of $45. 00 per hour $30. 00 asterisk 1. 5 equals $45. 00, resulting in a total overtime pay of $270. 00. The correct answer is D. Calculate the total overtime hours by summing the hours worked beyond an 8-hour shift on each day. 2 hours on day 1 plus 4 hours on day 2 equals 6 total overtime hours. Then multiply this by the overtime rate of $45. 00 per hour $30. 00 asterisk 1. 5 equals $45. 00, resulting in a total overtime pay of $270. 00. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for Chicago Police Department (CPD) officers, managing overtime expenses while ensuring adequate staffing for public safety. The core tension lies between fiscal responsibility and operational necessity. Officers must balance the need to control departmental budget with the imperative to respond effectively to the city's needs, especially during periods of heightened crime or special events. Accurate calculation and adherence to overtime policies are crucial to prevent both financial mismanagement and potential understaffing that could compromise public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a precise calculation of the total overtime hours worked by Officer Miller, factoring in the approved overtime rate and any applicable caps or limitations as stipulated by the Chicago Police Department's general orders and the collective bargaining agreement. This requires meticulous record-keeping and a clear understanding of the departmental policies governing overtime compensation. Specifically, the calculation would be total overtime hours equals hours worked on day 1 regular hours plus hours worked on day 2 regular hours. Then, total overtime pay equals total overtime hours asterisk approved overtime rate. This method ensures that Officer Miller is compensated accurately according to established departmental regulations and the union contract, while also providing the department with a clear and auditable figure for budget management. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to simply average the overtime hours worked across both days and multiply by the standard hourly rate. This fails to account for the specific overtime rate, which is often higher than the regular rate, and ignores potential daily overtime thresholds or caps that might be in place. Another incorrect approach would be to only consider the hours worked beyond a standard 8-hour shift on the second day, disregarding any approved overtime worked on the first day. This would lead to undercompensation for the officer and misrepresentation of actual overtime expenditure. A further incorrect approach would be to round up the total overtime hours to the nearest full hour without proper justification or adherence to departmental policy on partial hour compensation. This could lead to overpayment and budget discrepancies. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach overtime calculations by first consulting the relevant departmental policies and collective bargaining agreements. They must then meticulously record all hours worked, distinguishing between regular and overtime hours. Calculations should be performed using the exact approved overtime rate and any specified caps or limitations. Transparency and accuracy in reporting are paramount to maintaining trust and ensuring fair compensation and responsible fiscal management. Question 11. Quality control measures reveal that during a traffic stop in Chicago, Illinois, an officer discovered a handgun partially concealed beneath the driver's seat. The officer, concerned about the weapon's potential use in ongoing criminal activity, needs to ensure its proper handling. Which of the following actions best adheres to the regulatory framework governing evidence collection and chain of custody for the Chicago Police Department and Illinois law? Option A. The officer hands the firearm to the driver's passenger, who is a known associate of the driver, and asks them to hold onto it until the stop is concluded. Option B. The officer meticulously documents the discovery, photographs the firearm in situ, carefully packages it in an evidence bag, labels it with all required information, and immediately transports it to the CPD's designated evidence lockup. Option C. The officer leaves the firearm on the floorboard of the vehicle, secured by closing the door, and proceeds to conduct a more extensive search of the vehicle's trunk. Option D. The officer places the firearm directly into the passenger seat of their patrol vehicle for transport to the station, intending to bag it upon arrival. Correct answer is B. The officer meticulously documents the discovery, photographs the firearm in situ, carefully packages it in an evidence bag, labels it with all required information, and immediately transports it to the CPD's designated evidence lockup. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Chicago Police Department, CPD, officer regarding the proper handling of evidence. The core difficulty lies in balancing the immediate need to secure potential evidence with the strict procedural requirements mandated by the CPD's general orders and Illinois law concerning evidence integrity and chain of custody. Failure to adhere to these protocols can lead to the exclusion of crucial evidence in court, jeopardizing investigations and undermining public trust. The officer must exercise sound judgment to ensure evidence is collected and preserved without compromising its admissibility. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting the discovery of the firearm, securing it in a manner that preserves its condition and prevents tampering, and immediately initiating the chain of custody process by properly packaging and labeling the evidence according to CPD general orders. This approach ensures that the evidence is handled in a way that meets both investigative needs and legal admissibility standards. Specifically, CPD general orders mandate detailed documentation of all evidence, proper sealing and labeling, and the immediate transfer to the evidence custodian or designated secure location, thereby maintaining the integrity of the chain of custody as required by Illinois law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately placing the firearm in the officer's personal vehicle without proper packaging or documentation. This violates CPD general orders regarding evidence handling and chain of custody. It introduces a significant risk of contamination, tampering, or loss, and creates gaps in the documented chain of custody, which could lead to the evidence being deemed inadmissible in court under Illinois evidentiary rules. Another incorrect approach is to leave the firearm unsecured at the scene while continuing to search the immediate area for other potential evidence. This exposes the firearm to environmental damage, potential alteration by unauthorized individuals, or even theft. It directly contravenes the CPD's responsibility to secure and preserve all potential evidence promptly and effectively, and fails to establish an immediate chain of custody, thereby risking its integrity. A further incorrect approach is to hand the firearm directly to a civilian witness for safekeeping. This is a severe breach of protocol and Illinois law. Police officers are solely responsible for the custody and control of seized evidence. Entrusting evidence to a civilian creates an unmanageable break in the chain of custody, introduces an unacceptable risk of tampering or loss, and would almost certainly result in the evidence being suppressed in any subsequent legal proceedings. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established departmental policies and relevant state laws. This involves 1. Recognizing the nature of the item discovered as potential evidence. 2. Immediately securing the evidence in a manner that preserves its integrity and prevents unauthorized access. 3. Initiating the formal chain of custody procedures as outlined in departmental general orders, including thorough documentation, proper packaging, and secure transfer. 4. Consulting with supervisors or evidence technicians if any procedural ambiguity arises. This systematic approach ensures accountability, maintains evidence integrity, and upholds the legal standards necessary for successful prosecution. Question 12. The risk matrix shows a high probability of a witness having crucial information regarding a recent burglary in a Chicago neighborhood. Upon arriving at the scene, a uniformed Chicago Police Department, CPD, officer encounters the witness, who appears visibly distressed but willing to speak. What is the most appropriate and regulatory compliant course of action for the officer to take immediately? Option A. Instruct the witness to wait at the scene without any formal documentation or supervision until a detective arrives later in the day. Option B. Take notes of the witness's observations but do not formally record them as a statement, assuming the information will be gathered later by detectives. Option C. Directly question the witness about the details of the crime and record their statements to expedite the information gathering process. Option D. Secure the scene and immediately contact the CPD's Detective Bureau or designated investigative unit to manage the witness interview and evidence collection. The correct answer is D. Secure the scene and immediately contact the CPD's Detective Bureau or designated investigative unit to manage the witness interview and evidence collection. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the strict legal and ethical boundaries governing evidence collection and witness interaction. The pressure to solve a crime quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise the integrity of an investigation and violate an individual's rights. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions taken are lawful, ethical, and contribute to a valid and admissible case. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the scene and then contacting the appropriate investigative unit or supervisor to ensure proper evidence handling procedures are followed. This approach is correct because it prioritizes the integrity of the investigation and adheres to the strict protocols established by the Chicago Police Department, CPD, for evidence collection and witness interviews. By involving specialized units, the officer ensures that any statements or observations are documented in a manner that is legally sound and can be used in court. This aligns with the CPD's commitment to due process and the lawful apprehension of offenders, as outlined in departmental general orders and Illinois state law regarding evidence and witness testimony. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to directly question the witness about the details of the crime and record their statements without informing supervisors or investigative units. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses established protocols for evidence collection and witness management. Such actions could lead to the contamination of evidence, the creation of inadmissible statements due to improper procedure, and potential violations of the witness's rights if not handled by trained investigators. It undermines the chain of custody and the overall reliability of the investigation, potentially jeopardizing any subsequent prosecution. Another incorrect approach is to instruct the witness to wait at the scene without any formal documentation or supervision until a detective arrives later. This is professionally unacceptable because it leaves the witness unsupervised and their potential testimony undocumented in a timely and secure manner. The witness might leave, forget details, or be influenced by others, compromising the quality and admissibility of their statement. It also fails to capture immediate observations that might be crucial for the ongoing investigation, deviating from the CPD's responsibility to diligently pursue all leads and secure all relevant information promptly and lawfully. A further incorrect approach is to take notes of the witness's observations but not formally record them as a statement, assuming the information will be gathered later by detectives. This is professionally unacceptable as it creates a gap in the investigative process. Unrecorded or informally noted observations may be deemed unreliable or inadmissible if not properly documented according to CPD procedures. It also fails to establish a clear record of what the witness initially observed, potentially leading to discrepancies or challenges to the evidence later in the legal process. The CPD mandates thorough and formal documentation of all investigative findings. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to departmental policy and state law. This involves a systematic approach. First, secure the scene and ensure the safety of all individuals. Second, identify and preserve potential evidence. Third, contact the appropriate investigative personnel or supervisors to manage witness interviews and evidence collection according to established protocols. Fourth, document all actions taken and observations made in a clear, concise, and accurate manner. This framework ensures that all investigative steps are lawful, ethical, and contribute to a robust and defensible case, upholding the principles of justice and accountability. Question 13. Benchmark analysis indicates that Chicago Police Department, CPD, officer observes a vehicle matching the description of one involved in a recent felony narcotics transaction. The officer initiates a traffic stop. Upon approaching the vehicle, the officer notices a strong odor of marijuana emanating from the passenger compartment and sees a small, clear plastic baggie containing a green leafy substance on the passenger seat. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the officer to take, adhering to Illinois law and CPD policy? Option A. Secure the vehicle and its occupants, then conduct a warrantless search of the vehicle based on the plain view observation and the odor of marijuana, as probable cause has been established. Option B. Allow the driver to exit the vehicle and then conduct a search of the vehicle. Option C. Immediately call for a supervisor and wait for further instructions before taking any action regarding the vehicle or its occupants. Option D. Issue a citation for the observed traffic violation and allow the vehicle to proceed without further investigation. The correct answer is A. Secure the vehicle and its occupants, then conduct a warrantless search of the vehicle based on the plain view observation and the odor of marijuana, as probable cause has been established. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the Chicago Police Department's CPD commitment to upholding the Illinois Vehicle Code and departmental general orders regarding traffic stops and evidence handling. The officer must balance the immediate need to secure potential evidence with the imperative to conduct the stop and subsequent actions in strict accordance with legal and departmental mandates. Failure to do so can lead to the suppression of evidence, disciplinary action, and erosion of public trust. The officer's judgment is critical in determining the appropriate course of action that respects individual rights while fulfilling their duty. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the vehicle and its occupants to prevent the destruction or removal of evidence, while simultaneously initiating the process for a lawful search based on probable cause. This approach prioritizes the integrity of the investigation and the potential for prosecution. Specifically, the officer should have initiated a traffic stop, detained the driver and any passengers, and then, if probable cause developed during the stop, e.g., observing contraband in plain view, smelling marijuana, or receiving consent, proceeded with a search of the vehicle. This aligns with the principles of the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Illinois law, which require probable cause for a warrantless search of a vehicle. Departmental general orders would also mandate such a procedure to ensure evidence is lawfully obtained. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately search the vehicle without establishing probable cause. This violates the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. Even if the officer has a hunch alone does not constitute probable cause. Another incorrect approach would be to allow the driver to exit the vehicle and then search it without probable cause, as this still constitutes a warrantless search without sufficient legal justification. Furthermore, failing to secure the vehicle and its occupants while attempting to obtain a warrant for a search, especially if there's a risk of evidence destruction, could compromise the investigation and is not the most effective immediate response. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement must operate within a strict legal and ethical framework. When encountering situations with potential evidence, the decision-making process should involve 1. Assessing the immediate threat to officer safety and the risk of evidence destruction. 2. Identifying if probable cause exists for a search based on observations or information. 3. If probable cause exists, proceeding with a lawful search or detention. 4. If probable cause does not exist but there is a risk of evidence destruction, taking steps to secure the scene while seeking legal authorization for a search, e.g., a warrant. 5. Always adhering to departmental policies and procedures, which are designed to align with constitutional and statutory requirements. Question 14. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a Chicago Police Department (CPD) officer observes an individual in a public park exhibiting furtive movements and a noticeable bulge under their jacket, which could be indicative of a concealed weapon. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the officer? Option A. Immediately detain and search the individual based solely on the presence of the bulge and furtive movements. Option B. Shout commands and demand the individual reveal the contents of their jacket from a distance. Option C. Approach the individual cautiously, observe their behavior and the environment for further indicators of threat, and be prepared to take appropriate action based on reasonable suspicion. Option D. Ignore the observation and continue patrolling the area without further investigation. The correct answer is C. Approach the individual cautiously, observe their behavior and the environment for further indicators of threat, and be prepared to take appropriate action based on reasonable suspicion. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Chicago Police Department (CPD) officer because it requires immediate judgment under pressure, balancing the need for swift action with the imperative to uphold constitutional rights and departmental policy. The officer must assess a situation that could escalate rapidly, potentially involving harm to individuals or the public, while simultaneously considering the legal boundaries of their authority. The presence of a potentially dangerous weapon, even if not immediately brandished, necessitates a careful risk assessment to determine the appropriate level of intervention without infringing upon the rights of individuals involved. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves approaching the situation with a measured and systematic risk assessment that prioritizes officer and public safety while respecting individual rights. This means observing the individual's behavior, the environment, and any potential threats, and then acting based on a reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed or is about to be committed, or that there is an immediate threat of harm. This approach aligns with the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, requiring probable cause or reasonable suspicion for police action. It also adheres to CPD policies that mandate officers to act with professionalism and to de-escalate situations whenever possible. The officer should gather information, assess the totality of the circumstances, and then decide on the least intrusive means necessary to ensure safety and enforce the law. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately detain or search the individuals solely based on the visual presence of a bulge under a jacket, without further observation of suspicious behavior or a direct threat. This fails to meet the legal standard of reasonable suspicion, which requires more than a mere hunch or a generalized fear. Such an action could lead to a violation of the individual's Fourth Amendment rights and result in evidence being suppressed or civil liability for the department. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the potential threat altogether and continue patrolling without further investigation, despite the officer's training and the observable presence of a potential weapon. This would be a failure of duty, potentially endangering the officer, the public, and the individuals themselves if the bulge represented an imminent threat. It would also be a dereliction of the officer's responsibility to maintain public safety and investigate suspicious circumstances. A third incorrect approach would be to use excessive force or make aggressive demands without first attempting to de-escalate or gather more information. This could escalate the situation unnecessarily, leading to injury or a wrongful arrest, and would violate CPD's use of force policies and ethical standards that emphasize proportionality and de-escalation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with situational awareness and information gathering. This involves observing all relevant factors, including behavior, environment, and potential threats. Next, they should assess the level of risk based on the gathered information, considering established legal standards such as reasonable suspicion and probable cause. Based on this assessment, they should determine the appropriate course of action, prioritizing de-escalation and the least intrusive means necessary to ensure safety and uphold the law. Continuous re-evaluation of the situation is also crucial, as circumstances can change rapidly. Question 15. Process analysis reveals that upon arriving at a reported disturbance in a Chicago park, an officer observes a group of individuals exhibiting agitated behavior near a discarded, partially open package. The officer's primary concern is to ensure public safety and gather information efficiently. Which of the following actions best balances immediate risk mitigation with the need for a thorough investigation? Option A. Immediately detain all individuals present in the vicinity of the package for questioning without further assessment. Option B. Conduct a full pat-down search of all individuals present to check for weapons, regardless of their behavior or perceived threat. Option C. Focus exclusively on securing the perimeter of the park and wait for detectives to arrive before engaging with anyone. Option D. Secure the immediate area to prevent unauthorized access. Make a brief, non-intrusive inquiry to assess the situation and identify any immediate threats, and then request appropriate specialized units for further investigation. The correct answer is D. Secure the immediate area to prevent unauthorized access. Make a brief, non-intrusive inquiry to assess the situation and identify any immediate threats, and then request appropriate specialized units for further investigation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance immediate public safety concerns with the procedural integrity of an investigation. The officer must make a rapid assessment of risk without compromising potential evidence or violating the rights of individuals involved. The pressure of a potentially volatile situation can lead to hasty decisions that may have significant legal and ethical repercussions for the Chicago Police Department, CPD, and the individuals involved. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing the immediate safety of the public and officers, while simultaneously initiating a preliminary assessment to gather information that can inform subsequent investigative steps. This approach involves securing the scene to prevent further harm or contamination, making a brief, non-intrusive initial inquiry to understand the immediate threat, and then calling for appropriate specialized units, detectives, evidence technicians, to conduct a thorough investigation. This aligns with CPD's general orders and Illinois state statutes regarding lawful stops, searches, and the preservation of evidence. The ethical imperative is to act decisively to protect life and property while respecting due process. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately detain all individuals present without any initial assessment of their involvement or threat level. This could lead to unlawful detentions, violating the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Illinois' laws on reasonable suspicion. It also risks alienating potential witnesses and hindering the investigation by creating an adversarial atmosphere. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on securing the scene and waiting for detectives without making any attempt to assess the immediate situation or gather any preliminary information. While scene preservation is crucial, a complete lack of initial inquiry could miss critical, time-sensitive information about the nature of the incident or the immediate whereabouts of potential suspects or victims, potentially jeopardizing safety or the investigation. A third incorrect approach is to conduct a full search of all individuals present without probable cause or reasonable suspicion that they are armed and dangerous. This would constitute an unlawful search and seizure, violating constitutional protections and Illinois law, and could lead to the suppression of any evidence found. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered approach to risk assessment. First, assess immediate threats to life and safety. Second, take necessary actions to mitigate those threats. Third, initiate a preliminary information gathering phase to establish reasonable suspicion or probable cause for further action. Fourth, call for specialized units as needed. Throughout this process, officers must remain mindful of constitutional rights and departmental policy, documenting all actions and observations meticulously. Question 16. Strategic planning requires Chicago Police Department, CPD, officers to anticipate potential challenges during an incident response. If a CPD officer arrives at a scene where a disturbance has occurred, and there are several individuals present who appear to be witnesses or involved parties, what is the most critical initial step to ensure a comprehensive and lawful investigation? Option A. Allow individuals to move freely within the area to avoid causing alarm or suspicion. Option B. Prioritize the apprehension of any individuals who seem agitated or defensive, regardless of the scene's integrity. Option C. Focus on quickly identifying and interviewing all individuals present to gather immediate statements. Option D. Immediately establish a perimeter around the scene to prevent unauthorized access and preserve potential evidence. The correct answer is D. Immediately establish a perimeter around the scene to prevent unauthorized access and preserve potential evidence. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance immediate public safety concerns with the need for thorough evidence collection and adherence to established investigative protocols. The pressure to quickly resolve a situation that could escalate, coupled with the potential for public scrutiny, necessitates careful judgment to avoid compromising the integrity of an investigation or violating an individual's rights. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the scene to preserve potential evidence and prevent further contamination or loss. This approach is correct because it aligns with the fundamental principles of criminal investigation and the Illinois rules of evidence, which emphasize the importance of maintaining the chain of custody and ensuring the admissibility of evidence. By establishing a perimeter and controlling access, officers uphold their duty to conduct a lawful and effective investigation, thereby protecting the rights of the accused and the integrity of the judicial process. This proactive measure ensures that any evidence discovered can be properly documented, collected, and analyzed, leading to a more accurate and just outcome. Incorrect approach is analysis. Failing to secure the scene and immediately allowing individuals to enter and potentially disturb evidence is professionally unacceptable. This action directly violates investigative best practices and could lead to the loss or contamination of crucial evidence, rendering it inadmissible in court. It undermines the investigative process and could result in a failure to identify or apprehend the responsible party. Focusing solely on immediate apprehension without considering the preservation of the crime scene is also professionally unacceptable. While apprehension is a critical objective, it must be balanced with the need to gather evidence that supports the charges and ensures a successful prosecution. Neglecting scene security in favor of immediate arrest can lead to a weak case due to lack of corroborating evidence. Prioritizing the comfort and immediate release of individuals present, even if they appear uninvolved, without first assessing the scene for potential evidence, is professionally unacceptable. This approach risks overlooking critical clues that could be vital to the investigation. The duty to investigate thoroughly outweighs the desire to expedite the departure of bystanders, especially when the nature of the incident is unclear or potentially serious. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic approach to incident response. This involves first assessing the immediate safety of all individuals, then prioritizing the preservation of the scene to protect potential evidence. This should be followed by a methodical approach to evidence identification, documentation, and collection, all while adhering to legal and ethical guidelines. Decision-making should be guided by established protocols, the principles of due process, and the objective of achieving justice through a thorough and lawful investigation. Question 17. Benchmark analysis indicates that Chicago Police Department, CPD, officer responding to a call about suspicious activity observes an individual in a public park carrying a bulky, unmarked bag that appears to be emitting a faint, unusual odor. The individual seems nervous and attempts to move away from the officer. Considering the immediate need to assess potential threats and the legal framework governing police actions in Illinois, which of the following represents the most appropriate initial response for the officer? Option A. Discreetly follow the individual at a distance to observe their actions without direct engagement, and only intervene if they engage in overt criminal behavior. Option B. Inform dispatch of the observation and continue with other patrol duties unless the individual directly approaches the officer or exhibits overtly threatening behavior. Option C. Secure the immediate area, observe the individual and the bag from a safe distance, and request the presence of CPD detectives and a K-9 unit to assess the situation and potential contents of the bag. Option D. Immediately approach the individual, demand to know the contents of the bag, and if the individual refuses to answer, attempt to seize the bag for inspection. The correct answer is C. Secure the immediate area, observe the individual and the bag from a safe distance, and request the presence of CPD detectives and a K-9 unit to assess the situation and potential contents of the bag. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Chicago Police Department, CPD, officer because it involves balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical constraints governing evidence collection and witness interaction. The officer must make a rapid assessment of the situation, considering potential risks to themselves and the public, while also adhering to the strict protocols of the CPD and Illinois law regarding search and seizure and the rights of individuals. The urgency of a potential ongoing crime necessitates swift action, but haste can lead to procedural errors with significant legal repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the scene and immediately requesting appropriate specialized units, such as detectives and forensic technicians, to handle the evidence and conduct detailed interviews. This approach is correct because it aligns with CPD policy and Illinois law, which mandate that trained personnel handle evidence collection to ensure its admissibility in court and protect the integrity of the investigation. Specifically, the Illinois Code of Criminal Procedure and CPD General Orders emphasize the importance of proper chain of custody and the avoidance of contamination or unauthorized handling of potential evidence. By deferring to specialized units, the officer upholds these principles, ensuring that any evidence gathered is legally obtained and scientifically sound, thereby supporting a successful prosecution and protecting the rights of all involved. This also allows the responding officer to focus on immediate public safety concerns, such as de-escalation, rendering aid, and securing the perimeter. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately questioning the individual about the contents of the bag without probable cause or a warrant, and without considering the individual's rights. This is professionally unacceptable because it violates the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as applied in Illinois, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. Without probable cause or a warrant, such questioning could be construed as an unlawful detention or interrogation, potentially leading to the suppression of any evidence discovered. Another incorrect approach is to confiscate the bag without any legal justification, such as reasonable suspicion of a crime or consent from the individual. This action would constitute an illegal seizure under Illinois law and the U.S. Constitution, jeopardizing the entire investigation and exposing the officer and the department to civil liability. A third incorrect approach is to ignore the suspicious bag and the individual, proceeding with other duties without any further investigation or documentation. While an officer cannot act on mere suspicion, ignoring a clearly suspicious circumstance without any attempt to assess the situation or document observations is a failure to uphold the duty to investigate potential criminal activity and maintain public safety. This could be seen as dereliction of duty and would prevent the CPD from addressing a potential threat. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes public safety and legal compliance. This involves a rapid yet thorough assessment of the situation, identifying potential risks and legal considerations. The framework should guide officers to act within their authority, utilizing established protocols and seeking assistance from specialized units when necessary. Key considerations include 1. Immediate safety assessment. 2. Identification of legal grounds for action e.g. probable cause, reasonable suspicion, consent. 3. Adherence to departmental policies and procedures. And 4. Documentation of all observations and actions. In situations involving potential evidence, the default should be to preserve the scene and involve appropriate investigative personnel. Question 18. Benchmark analysis indicates that a Chicago Police Department (CPD) officer has received a tip regarding a potential witness to a recent burglary. The officer locates the individual at their home, and the individual appears hesitant to speak. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take in Chicago, Illinois, to gather information while adhering to CPD protocols and Illinois law? Option A. Engage in a casual conversation at the individual's residence, asking open-ended questions to gauge their willingness to provide information without explicitly mentioning their rights. Option B. Suggest that cooperating with the investigation would be in their best interest and could prevent future complications, implying that non-cooperation might have negative repercussions. Option C. Accept a brief, unrecorded verbal account of what the individual might have seen while they are standing on their porch, without further documentation. Option D. Inform the individual of their right to refuse to speak, explain that their cooperation is voluntary, and request to conduct a formal, recorded interview at the station or another suitable, neutral location. Correct answer is D. Inform the individual of their right to refuse to speak, explain that their cooperation is voluntary, and request to conduct a formal, recorded interview at the station or another suitable, neutral location. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Chicago Police Department (CPD) officer by requiring them to balance the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical constraints surrounding witness interviews, particularly when dealing with potentially vulnerable individuals. The officer must exercise careful judgment to ensure that any information obtained is admissible and that the rights of the individual are protected, avoiding any actions that could be construed as coercive or unduly influential. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves conducting a formal, recorded interview in a controlled environment, ensuring the individual understands their rights and the voluntary nature of their participation. This approach aligns with the Illinois Criminal Justice Information System (CJIS) policies and CPD departmental guidelines regarding evidence collection and witness management. By securing a voluntary statement under these conditions, the officer maximizes the reliability and admissibility of the information while upholding the individual's rights and departmental integrity. This method ensures transparency and accountability in the investigative process. Incorrect approaches analysis. Approaching the individual informally at their residence and asking leading questions without informing them of their rights or the voluntary nature of their statement is professionally unacceptable. This method risks obtaining coerced or unreliable information, potentially violating the individual's rights and compromising the investigation. It fails to adhere to standard interview protocols designed to protect both the subject and the integrity of the evidence. Conducting a brief, unrecorded conversation in a public place and accepting a verbal account without further documentation or clarification is also professionally unsound. While seemingly efficient, this approach lacks the rigor required for investigative purposes. It does not establish a clear record of the interaction, making the information difficult to corroborate or use in subsequent legal proceedings. Furthermore, it bypasses essential steps for ensuring the voluntariness and accuracy of the statement. Pressuring the individual to provide information by implying negative consequences for non-cooperation, even if not explicitly stated, is a severe ethical and regulatory failure. Such tactics can be considered coercive, rendering any obtained statement inadmissible and potentially leading to disciplinary action against the officer. This approach directly contravenes the principles of fair investigation and respect for individual liberties mandated by CPD policy and Illinois law. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance, ethical conduct, and investigative integrity. This involves 1. Identifying the objective gathering information. 2. Recognizing the constraints, legal rights, departmental policy. 3. Evaluating potential methods against these constraints. 4. Selecting the method that best achieves the objective while adhering to all requirements. In situations involving potential witnesses, this framework dictates a preference for formal, documented, and rights-respecting interview procedures over informal or coercive tactics. Question 19. Governance review demonstrates that following a traffic stop in Chicago, Illinois, where a witness reports seeing a handgun placed in the passenger seat of the vehicle shortly before the stop, an officer observes furtive movements by the driver. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the officer to take to ensure a lawful and effective investigation? Option A. Secure the vehicle and its occupants, and immediately contact a supervisor and the appropriate CPD investigative unit for guidance on further steps. Option B. Rely solely on the witness's statement to justify a search of the vehicle's passenger compartment for the alleged handgun. Option C. Conduct a warrantless search of the vehicle based on the witness's statement and the driver's furtive movements. Option D. Question the driver extensively about the handgun and the reason for their movements before advising them of their Miranda rights. The correct answer is A. Secure the vehicle and its occupants and immediately contact a supervisor and the appropriate CPD investigative unit for guidance on further steps. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for Chicago Police Department, CPD officers, balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical constraints governing evidence collection and individual rights. The officer must quickly assess the situation and determine the most appropriate course of action without compromising the integrity of a potential investigation or violating constitutional protections. The pressure of a rapidly evolving situation, coupled with the desire to apprehend a suspect, can lead to impulsive decisions that have significant legal ramifications. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the scene and immediately contacting a supervisor and the appropriate investigative unit. This approach prioritizes adherence to established CPD protocols and legal procedures. By involving supervisors and specialized units, the officer ensures that evidence is collected in a manner that is legally sound and admissible in court. This also allows for a coordinated response, leveraging the expertise of different divisions within the CPD. This aligns with the fundamental principles of due process and the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, requiring probable cause and often a warrant for such actions. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately search the suspect's vehicle without probable cause or a warrant. This action directly violates the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. Without specific, articulable facts to suggest the vehicle contains evidence of a crime, such a search would be considered unlawful, rendering any evidence found inadmissible in court and potentially leading to civil liability for the officer and the CPD. Another incorrect approach is to question the suspect extensively about the incident before advising them of their Miranda rights. If the suspect is in custody, failing to provide Miranda warnings before custodial interrogation is a violation of their Fifth Amendment rights. Any statements made by the suspect under these circumstances would likely be suppressed, hindering the investigation. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the witness's statement to justify a warrantless search of the vehicle. While witness statements are valuable, they must be corroborated or meet the threshold for probable cause on their own. Acting solely on a witness's hunch or unverified information without further independent investigation or supervisory consultation can lead to an unlawful search and a breakdown in procedural integrity. Professional reasoning. When faced with a situation requiring immediate action, CPD officers should follow a structured decision-making process. First, assess the immediate safety of the public and themselves. Second, secure the scene to preserve potential evidence. Third, consult with supervisors and relevant investigative units to ensure all actions are compliant with CPD policy and constitutional law. Fourth, gather information and facts to establish probable cause if a search or arrest is contemplated. Finally, act within the bounds of the law, prioritizing due process and individual rights. Question 20. Benchmark analysis indicates that the Chicago Police Department, CPD, must prepare for a potential large-scale protest in downtown Chicago. Intelligence suggests a 60% probability of a moderate disturbance, requiring 50 officers and 10 patrol cars for 8 hours, with an associated overtime and equipment cost of $15,000. There's also a 30% probability of a severe disturbance, requiring 150 officers and 30 patrol cars for 12 hours, with an associated overtime and equipment cost of $60,000. The remaining probability is for a minor disturbance requiring 20 officers and 5 patrol cars for 4 hours, with an associated overtime and equipment cost of $5,000. Based on these probabilities and costs, what is the expected cost of the CPD's response to this potential event? Option A, $15,000. Option B, $22,500. Option C, $30,000. Option D, $27,000. The correct answer is D, $27,000. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving resource allocation under pressure, a common occurrence for Chicago Police Department (CPD) officers. The need to balance immediate tactical needs with long-term strategic planning requires careful judgment. Miscalculating the required resources could lead to either an inadequate response, jeopardizing public safety and officer well-being, or an inefficient deployment of personnel and equipment, impacting overall departmental effectiveness and budget. The specific context of a potential civil disturbance, which can escalate rapidly and unpredictably, demands a robust and accurate risk assessment. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic approach to risk assessment that quantifies potential threats and their impact. This includes identifying all relevant variables, assigning probabilities and potential consequences, and then calculating the expected value of different response scenarios. For example, if the probability of a moderate disturbance is 70% with an estimated cost of $10,000 in overtime and equipment, and the probability of a severe disturbance is 30% with an estimated cost of $50,000, the expected cost would be calculated as /E/text cost equals 0, 70 times $10,000 plus 0. 30 times $50,000 equals $7,000 plus $15,000 equals $22,000. This quantitative method provides an objective basis for determining the necessary resource allocation, ensuring that the response is proportionate to the assessed risk and aligns with departmental policies on efficient resource management and public safety mandates. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely solely on anecdotal evidence or past experiences without a structured assessment. While past events can inform risk assessment, they do not account for unique situational factors or evolving circumstances. This can lead to under- or oversourcing, as it lacks a quantifiable basis for decision-making. Another incorrect approach is to focus only on the most extreme potential outcome without considering its probability. This can lead to excessive resource allocation, diverting personnel and equipment from other critical duties, and potentially straining the department's budget unnecessarily. It fails to acknowledge the principle of proportionality in resource deployment. A third incorrect approach is to make a decision based on the lowest possible cost, without adequately considering the potential impact on public safety and officer effectiveness. This prioritizes financial efficiency over the primary duty of protecting citizens and maintaining order, which is a fundamental ethical and regulatory failure for law enforcement. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that integrates quantitative analysis with qualitative judgment. This involves 1. Clearly defining the potential threat and its scope. 2. Identifying all relevant variables and their potential impact. 3. Assigning probabilities to different outcomes. 4. Calculating the expected value or cost-benefit of various response options. 5. Consulting relevant departmental policies and guidelines. 6. Exercising professional judgment to refine the quantitative assessment based on real-time intelligence and situational awareness. This structured approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with the department's mission and ethical obligations.